Imagine finding like a single ancient book that just lays out how societies work, how they rise, how they fall, how power shifts, even how we learn stuff.
Yeah, like a roadmap written, what, 7 centuries ago. And the amazing thing is it still feels incredibly relevant.
Totally. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're getting into the world of Ibn Khaldun, this amazing 14th century thinker, and his huge work, the Muqaddimah.
And we're guiding this exploration using Franz Rosenthal's translation. It's really well regarded. We've picked out excerpts covering everything from, civilization basics, economics, science, even language. Gives a pretty broad picture.
Right. Our goal here is to pull out the key ideas, the surprising bits from this really dense, important text. Think of it as a shortcut to getting informed on these big topics. Hopefully you'll have some of those aha moments along the way.
Definitely. So yeah, get ready. This could really change how you think about history, power dynamics, maybe even learning itself. These patterns he saw, they're still playing out.
Okay, so let's dive right in. Ibn Khaldun's starting point. His blueprint for society. He splits it basically into two types: Bedouin nomadic and sedentary city dwellers.
Exactly. And this isn't just like description, it's fundamental. He actually argues that the Bedouins come before the city folk. He even says the desert is the basis and reservoir of civilization.
Which is already kind of counterintuitive, right?
Totally. And it gets more so. He claims Bedouins are closer to being good and braver than people in cities.
Braver. Why?
Well, his reasoning is that city people rely too much on laws and protections. It erodes their fortitude and power of resist. They get soft, basically. The harsh desert life keeps the Bedouins tough and self-reliant.
Okay, so that toughness, that resilience born from the desert, that's the foundation. But what actually pushes society forward? What makes it organize and grow?
That's his really famous concept. Asabiyyah, group feeling. It's this incredibly strong sense of like solidarity and shared purpose. It's what lets tribes survive out there, protection and mutual defense.
And where does it come from? Is it just liking each other?
He's specific. He says group feeling results only from blood relationship or something corresponding to it. So family, kinship, that deep shared identity, it has to be really fundamental.
Right. And here's the kicker, the really fascinating part for me. He says this asabiyyah, this group bond, it naturally leads towards royal authority.
Yeah, it's not just about having a leader. He sees it as the ultimate goal, almost inevitable. It's about achieving superiority and the power to rule by force. It goes way beyond just being a tribal chief.
Wow. So the very thing that holds people together for survival also contains the seed of domination. That's quite a take.
It is. And he adds another layer, especially thinking about the Arabs of his time. He argued they could only really achieve that kind of royal power by using some religious coloring.
Religious coloring, like what?
Prophecy, sainthood, maybe some major religious movement, something that transcends just tribal loyalty.
So religion acts as a kind of social glue, but also something more, like a power multiplier.
Exactly. He saw it as an internal restraining influence. It helps curb individual pride and ambition, which he thought Arabs had plenty of, and it focuses everyone on a collective goal. That creates immense strength.
So you give examples?
Oh, yeah. The early Muslim conquests are his prime case. Tiny Arab armies defeating massive Byzantine and Persian forces. He attributes it to that religious fervor boosting their asabiyyah.
So like the battles of Al-Qadisiyah or Yarmouk.
Precisely. And later dynasties, too, like the Almoravids and Almohads. He says their religious organization doubled the strength of their group feeling. Religion supercharged their unity and drive.
Okay, so dynasty is formed, powered by asabiyyah, maybe amplified by religion. But he says they don't last forever, right? There's a cycle.
Yeah, a very clear arc. Once power is established, things start to change. Natural luxury sets in. The ruling group gets used to comfort, spending increases, demands grow.
And that original group feeling starts to fray.
It gets eroded, yeah. That initial cohesion weakens. And this leads to something really interesting and probably damaging. The rulers start replacing their original loyal followers, their kin, the people who fought alongside them, with outsiders, employing strangers and accepting them as followers, as he puts it.
Why would they do that? Seems risky.
Well, he suggests the old guard can become overbearing because they've known the ruler forever. They feel entitled. So the ruler brings in new people who owe their position entirely to him.
But these newcomers, they don't have the same deep loyalty, right? They don't share that original asabiyyah.
Exactly. They lack the same glory, the same deep-seated bond. The ruler is basically trading that powerful group feeling for hired help, which is never as strong or reliable in the long run. It's a sign the dynasty is weakening internally.
And this internal weakness often goes hand in hand with messing up the economy.
Absolutely. He's very critical of rulers getting involved in business. He says commercial activity on the part of the ruler is harmful to his subjects and ruinous to the tax revenue.
How so? What kind of things did rulers do?
Forcing merchants to buy goods from the ruler at inflated prices, for example, or making farmers sell only to them at low prices. It basically kills private enterprise. Merchants end up with stuff they can't sell, farmers lose their capital, people just go out of business.
So the ruler trying to grab more wealth directly actually destroys the source of the wealth.
Precisely. It undermines the whole system. And this ties into his broader point about injustice. He says, attacks on people's property, whether direct seizure or unfair taxes, remove the incentive to acquire and gain property.
If you think anything you earn will just be taken, why bother?
Right. So effort slackens, business dries up, the whole civilization slumps, people might leave, settlements empty out, cities decay. It's a downward spiral.
And this directly impacts the dynasty itself.
It's fatal. He states clearly that the disintegration of the status of dynasty and ruler follows directly from the collapse of civilization. The ruling structure can't survive when the society and economy falls apart.
Does he point to specific places where this happened?
Oh, yes. He mentions Yemen, parts of Persia, Iraq, Syria, North Africa, after the arrival of certain tribes. Places that became completely ruined because of injustice and mismanagement destroying the economic base. It's a stark warning about the consequences of bad governance.
So eventually the dynasty just fades away? Or is it always a violent end?
It can be a fade. He observes that once a dynasty is really old, established for generations, people just accept its rule. They develop a habit of subservience. At that point, the dynasty might even dispense with group feeling altogether.
Relying on mercenaries and paid soldiers instead.
Exactly. It looks stable, but he compares it to natural heat in a body that lacks nourishment. It's just burning itself out. It eventually reaches its destined time.
And that's when new groups, maybe from the fringes, can rise up.
That's often where the new energy comes from. He notes new dynasties often emerge from border areas and remote regions, where that raw asabiyyah still exists, while the old setters become senile and weak.
Okay, so we see the cycle of rise and fall. How did Ibn Khaldun think we should study this? How should we approach history itself? Because he was pretty critical of how it was often done, wasn't he?
Oh, definitely. He asked why historiography often became nonsensical and confused, just, stories repeated uncritically, a domain of the common people.
So what makes a good historian, in his view?
Someone with deep knowledge, not just of events, but of principles of politics, the true nature of existent things, and the differences among nations, places, and periods. And the crucial part? They have to check transmitted information with the basic principles they understand. You can't just accept stories at face value.
You need a framework for judging credibility.
Exactly. He admired scholars like At-Tabari, Al-Bukhari, Ibn Ishaq, people who were rigorous and critical in their approach.
It's about critical thinking applied to the past. Now, he also had some surprising ideas about scholarship itself, right? Like having too many books being a problem.
Yeah, that sounds really modern, doesn't it? He argued that the great number of scholarly works available is an obstacle on the path to attaining scholarship. And similarly, that short summaries or brief handbooks could also be detrimental.
How does that work? Why would more resources be bad?
His view was that learning scientific instruction is a craft. You have to master the process, the way of thinking. Just having lots of books or lots of summaries with different terminologies can actually confuse you and distract from mastering the core skills of the discipline.
So it's quality over quantity and process over passive consumption.
Right. He stressed the importance of the right attitude and warned against getting bogged down in secondary subjects for too long. Focus on the essentials. Master the craft.
Beyond history and scholarship, he also explored, well, more philosophical or even mystical areas, didn't he? Like the human soul, dreams.
He really tried to cover the whole spectrum of human experience and knowledge. He talked about human development, even suggesting, controversially perhaps, that the higher stage of man is reached from the world of the monkeys, marked by thought and reflection.
Interesting. And dreams.
He categorized dreams into 3 types: divine, angelic, and satanic. His idea was that sleep frees the rational spirit, partially, from the body's distractions, allowing it to perceive things beyond the senses.
What about things like astrology or alchemy? How did he view those?
With a critical eye, mostly. He cites Ptolemy saying astrology is conjectural, not certain. Ibn Khaldun adds that stars are just agents, one factor among many like genetics or environment.
So not dismissing it entirely, but putting it in perspective.
Exactly. For alchemy, he framed it around the philosophical question: are metals, like gold and silver, fundamentally different species, or just variations of the same underlying substance? That was the core debate.
And he made clear distinctions between, say, miracles and magic.
Very clear. Miracles come from good people, for good purposes, often divinely supported, connected to prophecy. Sorcery. That's practiced by evil persons for evil actions, often involving devils or psychic manipulation for harm. Intention and source are crucial.
It seems like logic was pretty central to his way of evaluating knowledge.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He defined logic as the norm enabling intellectual speculation to distinguish between true and false. He talked about primary intelligibilia, basic concepts from our senses like round, and secondary intelligibilia, combining those basics to build sciences.
He even touches on letter magic, Sayaraja.
Briefly, yeah. As a practice people use trying to find answers to the numerical values and connections of letters, he documented it as part of the intellectual landscape of his time.
Fascinating. Let's shift now to language itself, communication, literature. He looked at the history of Arabic writing, too.
He did. He traced his path from South Arabia through places like Al-Hira in Iraq, eventually to the Quraysh in Mecca.
And he drew a line between just speaking a language well and knowing its grammar.
A very important distinction. He separated linguistic habit, that natural fluent command you get from immersion from formal Arabic philology, the study of grammatical rules. Mastering the rules doesn't automatically make you an eloquent speaker, and vice versa.
So how do you develop that good linguistic habit? He mentioned memorization, right?
Yes, hugely important. Much memorizing, he stressed. But it's not just memorizing anything. The quality of the resulting habit depends on the quality, type, and amount of the memorized material.
Meaning?
Memorizing classic, high-quality poetry and prose, he named specific older authors, builds a much better, more eloquent habit than memorizing more recent, possibly inferior works. You absorb the quality you expose yourself to.
Makes sense. Immerse yourself in the best. He defined eloquence itself as conformity of speech to the requirements of the situation.
Right. Being appropriate, effective. And for poetry, he had a specific definition: metrical, rhymed lines, each making sense on its own. He even criticized famous poets like Al-Mutanabbi for not sticking to what he saw as traditional Arab methods.
Though he did acknowledge new forms emerging, like in Spain.
Yeah, the Miwasha and the Zal. He noted their artistic language and rhymes appealed to ordinary people. He wasn't completely stuck in the past.
But he was more critical of changes in prose writing.
He was. He observed the shift from clear, straight prose towards more elaborate, contrived techniques, especially the heavy use of rhyme, like the style of Ibrahim B. Hilal as Sabi.
And he thought this was bad.
He lamented that it led to a situation where good and bad becoming inextricably confused with each other. The focus shifted from clarity to cleverness, sometimes obscuring the meaning, style over substance, essentially.
Did he give any advice to writers, especially poets?
Practical stuff. Revise your work harshly. Be willing to throw stuff out. Avoid bending the rules too much. Poetic license he saw as a weakness. And aim for clarity, words that are easy to grasp. Good advice for any writer, really.
Absolutely. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground, from how civilizations start and end, the role of asabiyyah, the dangers of injustice, to how we should approach history, learning, even language and poetry.
It's amazing how interconnected it all is in his thinking. The Bedouin lifestyle, group feeling, economic health, critical thinking, eloquent communication, it all ties together to explain the bigger picture of human society.
And understanding these patterns, these forces he identified centuries ago, it really does give you a different lens for looking at our world today, doesn't it?
Definitely. The challenges might look different on the surface, but many of the underlying dynamics, group identity, economic incentives, the struggle for power, the need for critical thought, are timeless.
He urged historians back then to check transmitted information with the basic principles to avoid history becoming nonsensical. So a final thought for you listening. In our age, with so much information, so many conflicting stories, how can you apply Ibn Khaldun's rigorous, principle-based critical thinking to make sense of it all?
How do you sift through the noise today? Something to think about.
This has been another Deep Dive.